We're going to finish up Acts, where we're going to finish up the book of Acts today. We're going to finish up Psalm 73. I want to do a quick review of what we talked about. It seems like eons ago, but it was only 2 weeks ago, first 17 verses. There was 3 terms that the commentary writer used to describe what's going on in the life of Asaph, and actually in the lives of all the people that are going through the lament psalms. There's orientation, where they are in proper orientation in their understanding and their perspective about how God is, about how their faith is, and how they are certain of His justice. Then somewhere along the way they go through what's called a disorientation. They move to doubts and uncertainty of God's justice. They start looking around them and seeing what's happening. And they say, that's not what I thought God was supposed to be doing. And then, through revelation and through whatever process God uses to choose, He gets them reoriented to the right perspective in looking at Him. Once he expressed doubt, but then he comes to a new understanding of God and is able to praise Him even more fully. Whenever you go through a problem, when you get that word of revelation and now you understand what the problem actually was that you were facing, then you're free. You're freed up to worship God more fully. And that's what we're going to see in Psalm 73. I want to read, I'm not going to read all of it, but verse 1 says this: "Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart." He starts out in this verse in proper orientation with regard to a specific attribute of God, and that is God's goodness. Specifically to those who are pure in heart, which we consider here to be His people. The pure in heart are His people. But, there may always be a but, many times, and there is one here, and it shows up in verse 2. Verse 2 says this: "But as for me, my feet had almost slipped, and I had nearly lost my foothold." It is the almost nearly slipping of his feet, which is a metaphor for his faith in God. His faith nearly slipped. We're going to see he starts having these doubts about how God is how things are going on around him, or in a contradiction to what he thought it ought to be happening. He's indicating that his properly oriented view of God may be slipping into the disoriented view of God, meaning he may be having some doubts about his understanding of God's goodness. The way this disoriented view of God's goodness shows itself through Asaph's envy of arrogant and wicked people. And this is the strangest thing. Now, if you'll remember, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Verse 3 says this: "For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." I envied the arrogant and the wicked. What a group of people to envy. Why would you want to do that? Okay, the problem arises with Asaph's misguided understanding of God's blessing the arrogant and wicked people financially and materialistically. He refers to them as prosperous rather than blessing him personally. He's blessing them. This is not about Asaph's being upset with him not blessing the righteous people. It's about him not being blessed personally. He says, you got all these wicked people out here that you're blessing financially, but you're not blessing me. That's what he wants. He says, and we're gonna see that. That's exactly right, because that's totally contrary to his understanding of his theology. We'll see it as we go. 4 through 11, Asaph produces what I call a laundry list of characteristics of the wicked people that God was blessing. And now this is the group that he was envying. Listen to these words that I'm not going to read them, but here's the words that are in those verses that describe these people. They have no struggles. That's not so bad. They have healthy bodies. That's not so bad. They have no burdens. That's not so bad. Now, this is in his perspective, remember. This is not necessarily how it is. This is just the way he perceives things. They're prideful. Now we're getting into a little uglier part of the people that he's envying. They're bent towards violence. They have calloused hearts. Now, this is the group he's envying. Why would you want to envy that kind of people? They're bent on doing evil. They speak with malice. In their arrogance, they threaten oppression, and it just goes on and on. That is the group. That's the way he described the group in this psalm that he is envying. None of these characteristics which should be present in the life of a godly person, and specifically Christian people. There's nothing there that Christians should envy. You know, in fact, a lot of those things Paul specifically said, if they're in your life, get them out of your life. You know, this business of malice, he said get rid of any kind of malice. Has no place. So he's found himself to be in a position of envy. And my question here is, how can that be? Meaning, how could he envy people who are described in such terms? Except they're making money. The answer rests in verse 12. Verse 12 says this: "This is what the wicked are like, always carefree, they increase in wealth." That is why he envies them. He looks past all of that ugliness that he lists off in the verses that come before it, the malice, the oppression, and the violence, all that stuff. He just looks right past it. He says, but they have carefree lives. They got enough money to weather all the ugliness that goes in their life. And so that's why I'm envying them. It's even regardless of the source of their income. They may have been making money through illicit means, through illegal this, illegal that. But the point was their life was easy and they were comfortable, and that was what Asaph was envying. Verse 13 and 14, I think, may be even the saddest part that's expressed here. Verse 13 and 14 says this: "Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure, in vain I have washed my hands in innocence. All day long I've been plagued, I've been punished every morning." Everything I have done in pursuing a godly life seems to have been a waste of time. That's the saddest part of the whole thing. Yeah, well, God, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. All this stuff I was doing in vain. It's not fair. Oh, man. Okay, so it's like it indicates everything I have done is in pursuing godly life seems to have been a waste of time. And not only that, I have not been blessed. He said, I was punished for it. That's what he said at the end of that verse. I was punished for it. Not only was I trying to do good, I'm being punished. Okay, so by his own admission, in verse 13, he tried to reason all of this out on his own. And the more he worked at it, the more the more pressed down he found himself. Because in verse 13, I forgot what it says. "Surely in vain I've kept my heart pure. In vain I have washed my hands of innocence." He just finds himself more pressed down. He's trying to figure it all out. He just can't do it on his own. Regardless of the specifics of Asaph's problem, his specific problem was, I'm looking how you're blessing the wicked. That's his problem. That's not how you necessarily have to interpret this whole psalm. You can look at your own life and say, I'm having this problem. I don't understand why you're never there when I call on you. I don't understand why you could do that to me. You forced me into a divorce when after all these things I did for you. I'm talking about my own life now. I said that. I don't understand how you could allow something like that to happen to me after all I did for you. So you could read the psalm and you can just take those verses out and take your own stuff and put in there. I don't understand it. I don't understand how you could do that. So I'm being godly. Why are you not responding to my problem? That's the bottom line. And when I say you're not responding to my problem, what does that mean? You're not solving it the way I want it solved. It's not. God works things out. Sometimes we just don't like the way He works them out. But in the long run, when you look back, you say, wow, wasn't that great that it worked out that way? Nevertheless. Okay, so we're going to start finding sweet, sweet words in verse 17, but look at verse 17. He said, verse 16 says, when I tried to understand all this, it was oppressive to me. I was trying to work all this out on my own. I'm seeing all these things, these blessings these wicked people are getting, in spite of the way they're behaved. I just don't understand it. And he's mulling it over his mind. How can that be? That's not how God's supposed to be, blah, blah, blah. Until, then he says until, in verse 17, until I entered the sanctuary of God, then I understood their final destiny. Asaph was oppressed until he entered the sanctuary of God. That doesn't have to be the temple. It doesn't have to be our sanctuary. It doesn't have to be a private place at home. It has to mean that he was willing to go into the presence of God, to turn it all over to Him and sit down and listen to what God has to say. Ooh, we're going to see some of that right down the way here. He doesn't sound very when he's trying to make things work out the way he wants them. I want to be like those guys. Okay? So God didn't drag him into the sanctuary. He didn't say, all right, you've been griping, just come in here and listen to what I got to say. He didn't say that at all. He went. He entered it. He entered into the sanctuary of God. No more trying to understand on his own merits. He's mulling all that stuff over. But he listened to God and he understood. That's the thing. It says that he understood. What did he understand? Their final destiny. See, we look at this little temporary slot in time that we call our life. And that's a very insignificant part of the time you're going to spend in total. You're born here and you die here, but what happens after that? That's when the really long-term stuff happens. And he understood that final destiny is where it's at, where it is. That's the important thing. God has this plan for us, but before he could even get to that, he's probably saying, yeah, but I want it now. Don't we say that? We get mad at somebody. We want to, what they did to me, I want them to be punished now. I want to see you act on them. And he's telling Asaph, well, it just may not be that way. Because Asaph came to the understanding that it may be, from your perspective, it may actually be in their final destiny, which means also in your final destiny. My final destiny. Okay, so what has happened is that Asaph started with a proper orientation. That's where he was. Then his feet, or his faith, were wavering, and he was becoming disoriented in his perception of God. He moved to doubts and uncertainty about God's justice. He's looking at, this is not how I think it's supposed to be. So he starts having doubts. Not doubts about the existence of God. He was doubting his attribute of goodness. And what we said last week, I want to say it one more time this week. What if he came to the conclusion and could prove in his own mind that God is not good? That's one attribute. What does that say about the other attributes? He's not good. I can prove it. Come on, y'all. Can't trust any of them. Maybe it brings them all into question. So he needs to come to a conclusion that God is good. Not for that reason, but he will come to the conclusion that he is good because it is true. Okay, so that gets us to verse 18, and these verses are so incredibly awesome. These verses have to do with the way you would want God to speak to you if you were having a problem and you were waiting on God to act. What kind of word do you have for me, God, after I've told you, I've had all these doubts, I've had all this stuff. What have you got for me? What we're going to be reading for the rest of the chapter is exactly what you would want God to say to you. Awesome. Asaph is in the early throes of revelation. He is starting to realize that those financially blessed, wicked people are the ones with the problem. And the ultimate resolution of the situation will be very painful for them. They look really like they're living the big life now. Things will change for sure someday. So 18 to 20 says this. Surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. As a dream when one awakes, so when you arise, O Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. He now understands that ultimately they will not just slip. And remember back in verse 1, he said his feet, he nearly slipped and all that stuff nearly fell. He says he's going to find out that they're the ones that they're on slippery ground, but what he's going to find out is they're not just going to slip. They're actually going to be cast down. It's not like you're walking along and you slip. You can be walking along and somebody's going to pick you up, and that person, this guy, is going to pick you up and just throw you down. That's what we're talking about. And you're going to be thrown down to ruin. It says it will be sudden and complete, and their ruin will be in the form of destruction. All right? Let me tell you what the note in my Bible, what I wrote in my Bible about verse 20. Verse 20 says, as a dream when he awakes, so when you arise, the Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. Here's what I wrote in my Bible, if I could read it. It almost seems as if God is not aware of this situation. It's like he's sleeping. With what seems to be it has to do with what he's actually going to do when you see that he's not sleeping, that he's actually awake. He's not sleeping. You see all these things happening. I'm watching it all. Are you sleeping? He's saying, no, I'm not sleeping. This is what's going to happen when you realize I'm awake. Okay, verse 21 and 22. I was wondering, all right, who said this? This is Yolanda. I was wondering where it was, and here it is. What happens to a person when he comes into the presence of God? Every time in the Bible, when he is brought into the presence of God, he is humbled. No other way to be there. Can you imagine being arrogant with God? I can't even imagine that. He is humbled. Let me read verse 21, 22. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, he's going through revelation now. He's getting an understanding to the solution to his problem. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. I think Asaph was very arrogant, very prideful, particularly that he can define and dictate how God should behave. That's arrogance. You know, you get mad at God saying, how could you do that to me? It takes arrogance to say something like that. And that's kind of the position he was in. But look at the condition of his heart. It was grieved. Look at the heart of, this is what comes into his presence. The condition of his spirit was bitter. It was all about me, and I was not getting what was due me. And why did I deserve it anyway? Because I was godly. That is his sole justification for deserving what he's not getting. Actually, he said, I was senseless. You know what senseless means? I looked it up. If you want to look at the dictionary definition of it, it means lacking common sense. An ungodly now I think back to 1 Corinthians. When I started thinking about stuff like that, I started thinking about 1 Corinthians 2:14. You only get this certain things from the Spirit. If y'all remember when we studied that, if you do not have the Spirit, you can never understand the spiritual side of things. These guys, the ungodly, the oppressive wicked that he's talking about here, don't have the Spirit. They could never come into the presence of God and say, I was senseless. They would never be able to see those things. If they could come into the presence of God and say things like that, I think that would mean there was an element of repentance in their life and the Spirit would be in their life. But as it is now, they could never understand that. He says, I was a brute beast, like an animal in every sense of the word, characterized by the absence of reasoning and intelligence. And, he says, I was ignorant. I think about this every time I see the word ignorance. So what do we say about ignorance? Stupid is forever. Ignorance can be fixed. Every time I see that word ignorant, I think about that. Stupid is forever. Ignorance can be fixed. And that is exactly what God does with Asaph, and he does it through revelation. Asaph is sitting there watching all of these guys get blessed. The oppressive wicked. You got wicked people, you got evil pickles, and you got the oppressive wicked. The oppressive wicked. We talked about that word a little bit after class a couple of weeks ago. The oppressive, they just see no problem pressing people down to get what they want. So what we are about to read are some of the sweetest words in this Bible for a man whose faith was almost in jeopardy. Asaph's faith, he was wavering. These words are exactly what you would want to hear from God when you are going through torment and you need a word from God. These words are exactly what you want to hear from God when you have some kind of problem where you feel God has not acted justly toward you and you need a word from God. These words are exactly what you want to hear from God when God does not seem to hear you or respond to you, or he is not present with you as you expect him to be, and you need a word from God. Asaph needed a word from God. He had really it said that he was doing everything on his own. God was just kind of, not that he didn't believe in God, it's not that, it's not that he didn't believe he existed. He just, just things just didn't seem right to me. His theology says godly people should be blessed. Okay, so here's the sweet, where they go. Verse 23. Yet I am always with you. Let's go back. I was a senseless beast. Okay, Asaph says that. Then he says, yet I am always with you. You hold me by the right hand. What a change from thinking God doesn't know or doesn't care or what's worth. He is not even, he's even blessing the wrong people. He changed from that to the awareness that he is always with God, whether he knows it or not. Not that God is always with him. He realized that he is always with God. There's a pretty strong difference there. That's an acknowledgement that it's more than God is always with me. He said, I'm always with him. If he's always with me, that means I'm always with him. And not only that, he leads me by the right hand. And I don't even know that he's doing it. You know, you get through this problem and you look back and you say, wow, look what he did for me. How did that even happen? It happened because God was there leading you by the right hand. This is a metaphor for God's protection. God holds the hand of Asaph as the parent holds the hand of a child for protection. And I don't know what the right hand has to do with it, but there's probably some kind of significance built into that. It was because of this that Asaph slipped and almost fell, that he was kept from falling. God was holding his hand. You know, we went back to verse 2, said, I almost slipped, I almost fell. Now we find out it's because he was with God and God was holding his hand. Verse 24 says this, you guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. This is a reference to lifelong relationship with God. Counsel from God goes far beyond receiving advice from God. It has to do with providence. You just find yourself knowing what to do, or finding yourself in the right place at the right time, or you find yourself doing things where you're saying, this doesn't seem right, until you look back and says, until it does. I find myself here because God directed me here. It has to do with direct intervention in your life by God. This is the kicker. If you can understand or believe this, why do we worry? If we are always with God, and he is always holding our right hand, if you can believe, everybody sit here and say, yeah, then why do we worry? Well, there's more to it than that. It's because we're human and we want things to work out the way we want it to work out. Yeah, that's even worse. Okay, it is life-changing and attitude-transforming, and after all the counsel from God over a lifetime, Asaph and you and me can rest in the assurance of our eternal security, particularly in contrast to the fleeting and temporal nature of the wicked. After all this lifetime of counsel, what does it say? He's going to take me into glory. That's where the good stuff starts. Verse 25. This gets sweeter as we go. Whom have I in heaven but you? And being with you, I desire nothing on earth. That right there is one total transforming statement. That is not at all how he was before. He wanted everything on earth. Everybody knows that nobody lives forever in this temporary fleshly body. Our bodies die and decay and the heart stops beating, but God is the strength of our heart. The literal translation of that is the rock of our heart. He is the rock of our heart. Pointing to an image indicating lasting security and stability. We have this little bitty vapor time frame that we live in. For me, so far, 72 years. Almost. Not quite 72. the vapor part of my existence. Life's but a vapor. You read that, you know. And I expect stability from God during that time, but I also know that the real stability, certainty of the future lies in what comes after my heart stops beating. God is our portion. Now, is that in 26? Did I read that? Did I even read 26? What have I done here? Yeah, 26. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Deuteronomy, let's read that. Somebody find, I find it. Deuteronomy 10, verse 8 and 9. You got it? Yeah, read it. Yeah.
At that time the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister to him, and to bless his name to this day. Therefore Levi has no portion or inheritance with his brothers. The Lord is his inheritance, of the Lord your God bless him.
The Lord is the Levites. Remember we talked about Korah. Remember all that big thing we talked about Korah and how everybody had all their jobs, and then you had the Levites. And within the tribe of the Levites, they all had their jobs. But those people who in the tribe of Levite got no allocation of land. Their inheritance, their portion of the inheritance was the Lord. Now, what we're seeing is that is our portion too. Our portion of the inheritance is not this temporary stuff that we see walking around this earth. It is what comes when God takes us to glory, as it said in another verse. Our portion of our inheritance, the meaningful part, is God. Without getting into any long study of our portion, the point is that our portion of inheritance for those who know Christ is God. For his purpose, for his people, this is all that any of us have. God is our portion. And that portion is forever, is what it says here. And Wayne and I have been talking about that word forever. Forever seems pretty solid, right? How long is forever? But this is more than forever. And if you get over into Revelation and several other places in the Bible, it clarifies what forever means, or what eternity means. It means forever and ever. Forever. And when you think you can see to the end of eternity, there's more. It goes beyond. It's forever and ever. And that's our portion. Then you get to 27. 27 says, those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. Far from you, those who have no relationship with God. Those arrogant, in terms of what we've been studying, those prideful, those full of malice, those oppressive, wicked. That's a term I saw in the commentary, and it just seems to apply. You got wicked, and you got more wicked. And the more wicked, it seems to be the oppressive wicked. You know, you've got wicked people that just seem to be wicked, but you've got some that are wicked that try to be wicked. You know, do you understand what I'm saying? They try to be. They're full of malice. They oppress people down anytime they get a chance. If that's what it takes to get what they want, they're just oppressively wicked. So those that are far from you are the arrogant, the prideful, those full of malice, those oppressive, wicked, the unfaithful. These are promised destruction, and it was promised back in verse 18 to 20. In verse 28 says this, but as for me, boy, whenever it says that, I just love what's getting ready to come next. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds. It is good to be near God. Now I think back to verse 1, and it says, surely God is good, remember? Surely God is good. So this must mean, I might add, to be near God who is good. It is good to be near God who is good. He's made the full circle. He's made the whole circle here. He started out in right relationship, right perspective, and looking at God. He went through all this business and time period of doubt, misunderstanding his own theology, and now he's back to this reorientation period where he's totally freed up to worship God. Totally. He didn't have those doubts hanging over him. He's got resolution of those problems, and it was in his own mind. Now he's freed up to worship God fully. Asaph takes a lot on himself. Yeah, I did say this. I always seem to find a problem. Asaph takes, what did he say? He said, I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. Well, he didn't make the sovereign Lord his refuge. God has always been his refuge. I said, Asaph takes a lot on himself, claiming that he has made God his refuge, but at the very least, he has accepted God by faith into that role, and he says that he has no plans to be silent about it. He didn't make God his refuge. He expressed his faith in God so God could be his refuge. That's Psalm 73. And I tell you what, that psalm right there spoke to me. I mean, I could look at my life in there. I had 2 or 3 times in my life where you could just take those verses that had nothing to do with wickedness and being envy of the wicked and that kind of thing. But I had a couple of other problems that I could stick right in there. And I'm saying, you're not acting like the God that I thought I was following. I'm saying, whoop. That's Psalm 73. And I think, I'm not promising, but I think we're going to study Psalm 40 next week. So what I can do, I can mark off 73. I think it's 40. Let me look at 40. We got just a couple of minutes left here. Psalm 40. It looks pretty long, but it's pretty cool. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. But then you go over to verse 11, 12. Do not withhold your mercy from me, O Lord. May your love and your truth always protect me, for troubles without number surround me. Now we're getting into the lament of this whole thing. I read this and we need to study that one. So 40, we'll try 40 next week and see what we get out of it. I love y'all.